And welcome back, everybody, into another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined here by my colleague Jason Caldwell. I believe this is our first episode of the new year, so good to get back with everybody. It's been a little bit busy over the past couple weeks, so we apologize for rolling this one out a little bit late, but we certainly have plenty to talk about. Because Jason, the end of Auburn's 2023 season in the Music City Bowl feels like approximately 2 months ago, because there has been a ton going on since then. Coaching changes, personnel changes on the roster, transfer news, whether they're going to go after a transfer quarterback, all that stuff. It has been, and I think this is what we're going to deal with in the transfer portal now. This month, we're used to January being a big month for coaching changes, but now not only do you have guys going in the portal at a higher rate than ever before, but as we're going to talk about later, you also have to re-recruit your guys to not leave the portal, and it becomes an announcement now every time someone just doesn't leave your team and just decides to stay at the same school. So it's crazy. It's been a crazy past couple weeks, but I have a feeling this is what we're going to deal with pretty much every year from here on out.
Yeah, it is, and it's why you hear coaches. We've heard Hugh Freeze talk about it. We've heard other coaches talk about it. The impossibility of the job right now because of the time and the compressed schedule and everything that's going on all at once. Because you mentioned, if it's just early signing period, that's enough. If it's just early signing period now, you're talking about signing almost all your class. So that's going to be a busy time no matter what. But add in transfers and you go, okay, that's good. You go out and see if you can find a couple of guys for your own roster. Well, in year one and some of two of the transfer world, that's the way it was. But now it has become, okay, everybody's fair game. So if you're not prepared to be planning to be in the transfer portal, somebody's going to contact you and go, hey, why don't you come in the transfer portal? So you're having to recruit a large portion of your own roster to make sure they're good, and then go try to find some help while still recruiting high school guys, because you still have February coming up, the signing period, and you try to get everything. It's an unbelievably difficult situation that you deal with, and when you do that now for Hugh Freeze and Auburn, coming off of year one, where you still have so many holes to fill, it's different if you're like, I need one or two spots. He said it perfectly when we spoke to him on signing day. The problem is that you don't know what you're going to need until you need it. You can plan for it. And the perfect example is somebody was talking about the other day about Todd Pettiford in basketball terms, going, what are you going to do next year when you have potentially all three of those guys together? Guys, who knows what the roster looks like? We have no idea what it's going to look like. You may have all three of them. You may have one of them. You just don't know. And that's the problem now, is there's no planning. There's no way to go, hey, here's what our roster is going to look like. We're sitting here today, January 9th, and we still don't know what Auburn's roster is going to look like, and school starts tomorrow. Now, we've got a pretty good idea, but we don't know what the roster is, and school starts tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn basketball this time last year, I'm sure thought, well, Chance Westry will be really good for that 2-3 spot, and shoot, you might not even need Jalen Williams to come back, because Yohan Traore is a 5-star, so in his second year, that it's like you never know how things are going to change. And I think, to your point, and we'll get to the Keontae Scott news, but that was, I think, a good example of that. A couple weeks ago, I don't think many people would have foreseen that being something that even came up for Auburn. But if he had ended up staying in the transfer portal and leaving, then you all of a sudden would have had this really big need for some veteran defensive backs. Now, you may still have that because he's the only returning starter in the secondary. But yeah, things change so quickly, like you said. I kind of want to go in reverse here, Jason. We'll start with some of the coaching stuff from the past couple days, work our way back in the coaching side of things, and then talk about transfers. The most recent being, and I guess over the course of 3 days, they both happened. For the 5th straight season, 2 new coordinators for Auburn. And this is something that I think the general Auburn fans would probably be a lot more surprised that Ron Roberts will not be on this staff next season. He is taking an assistant coach job At Florida, Phil Montgomery on Friday, that was a straight firing announced by Hugh Freeze. It's been quite some time that we've seen that writing on the wall. Jason, I think the best way to put it is, I don't know, as of a couple weeks ago, I don't know if the expectation was super high at Auburn that these two guys were going to be on staff next year. It just depended on what that looked like. So let's talk a little bit about Ron Roberts first. He moves to take an assistant job at Florida. That DC job is now open. Ron Roberts, he did a good job. He did a good job on the field, and I think that's why people maybe are a little bit surprised at this move. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think this was going to be a situation where he, one way or another, he was not going to be on this staff next season for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think the first thing that people have to realize, and I have to continue to make sure I remind myself of it as well, is that we're not in 1988 anymore, where you had staffs that stayed together for 10 or 12 years, and you had all these guys that were part of it, and it doesn't happen that way anymore. Alabama has been the model of consistency on the field under Nick Saban, and they have changed coaches all over the place every year. I think I went back and looked. They had 5 offensive coordinators in the last 7 years in Alabama. To expect guys just to hang around for a long time, it just doesn't work that way. Now, some of your position coaches might stay and do some of that stuff, but even then, it's a lot. I've just come to expect it. Going, look, people say, "Hey, do you expect changes?" Yeah, probably, because that's the way of the world now. Guys move all over the place. There's so many coaching changes of the head coach variety that then it goes, okay, when you replace those coaches, then coordinators change and they want their guys. And so it's just a lot of movement. And so, but you're right. I think defensively probably a little bit more surprised than offensively, because we saw the offensive issues all along. Defensively, they played pretty solid considering the lack of kind of explosive talent up front. I thought they were pretty solid this season, but again, nothing surprises me anymore when you talk about movement, whether it's roster, coaches, whatever it is. People just have to get used to the fact that things are going to change all the time, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about potential candidates now, starting with the defensive side of the ball. I think one place where you and I were talking where you kind of have to start here is a guy who's already on staff, and it hasn't been officially announced by Auburn, but we reported the day of the Music City Bowl that Charles Kelly was being hired. That's the first time we're talking about this on here, Jason. That is, from a recruiting standpoint, it's hard to get much better than a guy like Charles Kelly. The list of NFL talent that he has recruited, mainly at Alabama and Florida State, during his tenure. He was the 24/7 Sports Recruiter of the Year last year at Alabama when they brought in like 5 stars, and he contributed, as a recruiter to 4 of them. And now he comes home. He comes home to Auburn. Of course, he's an Auburn alum. He had been here previously. The thing about Charles Kelly is, as a defensive coordinator candidate, people are going to look at Colorado last year, and they're going to look at Colorado's numbers. But there was a lot of good coaches on that Colorado staff, and you're not going to do any services for yourself looking at the numbers from that team because they were in such a bad position. And so I think, particularly as we talk about this defensive coordinator job, it's interesting and to compare to the offensive coordinator job in that there could be opportunities here, Jason, for co-DC labels for certain guys. Which guy is going to be the play caller on defense? I think really Auburn fans kind of staying patient here, taking a step back and seeing more how these 10 slots are going to be filled at the end of the day on this assistant staff, and then seeing after that who's going to be the defensive play caller, who's going to be the offensive play caller, because I think you've got a lot of opportunities here for some mixing and matching.
Yeah, like I said, Charles Kelly, he's going to be, I think, at a minimum, a co-defensive coordinator. Now, he might not be the play caller, but I think he's going to be involved in that. A guy that I've gotten to know really well over the years from his recruiting stops. A guy that was a walk-on at Auburn under Coach Dye and was here, and so he's very familiar with Auburn. But he hasn't. He's been at Florida State. He's been at Alabama. Obviously, Colorado last season. been really successful, but a guy that knows the state of Alabama inside and out. And so I think I think it's a really good hire for Auburn. Josh Aldridge has been a play caller, was a defensive coordinator at Liberty. So you have a guy on staff that has done some of those things as well. And then you start looking at, okay, where are the spots that potentially you could add and go, well, it depends on if you lose anybody else. And that's kind of where it goes from there. And so, so that's where it all kind of boils down to is, okay, what's the staff look like a week from now? And is there a potential for somebody else on the staff? And so I think that's it. Charles Kelly hasn't been announced. That's the one that would announce. And if so, then you start going, okay, is there any other spots that need to fill? Do you need another spot on defense, take one away from offense? That's the thing you don't know too. Kind of depending on what happens on the offensive side of the ball, where your numbers shake out from your assistant coaches, where those things come from. So still a lot to be determined right now as you move forward.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, I from a recruiting perspective, look, I think it'd be fair to say that Ron Roberts did a really good job on the field this year, like you said, especially relative to what they had. I mean, we talked about it during the season. They're putting guys, Asante, Kaufman, Keontae Scott, Jalen Simpson. We felt like those guys were in a good position to succeed because of the Marcus Harris, because of the system they were playing in. And so, there's some shoes to fill there. And so it'll be interesting to see, does Hugh Freeze designate, we mentioned Zach Arnett in our story yesterday of Guys Watch. He's got a super sharp SEC defensive mind who's looking for a job right now. That would be just hey, you're the defensive play caller, Charles Kelly in a co-DC position. But like you said, we would expect, or maybe not be surprised if there are even more, maybe one staff change or maybe a couple for this team moving forward. And so you just never know. You never know what it's going to look like and how those positions need to be filled. And on the offensive side of things, we mentioned Phil Montgomery. No surprise there. That was a marriage that really didn't mesh with Hugh Freeze. And I don't know if you caught on to this, Jason. I went back to this yesterday. I asked Hugh Freeze about his staff at the Music City Bowl the day before the game. Kind of went through and talked a little bit about, how important a staff is, how important staff continuity is, which obviously they're not really going to have now. But then the last thing he said in this quote, Jason, he said, I don't know I ever feel like I took over a program and got every single hire in the whole building right the first time.
Yeah. Because
you're just so crazy with recruiting. So I think there's always the evaluation from our chair of, can we improve ourselves in some way? And I remember hearing that at the time, and I was like, it's not a super ringing endorsement. It's not a huge endorsement for this staff right now. And then obviously a couple weeks later, some changes started to come down the line.
Yeah, I agree. I do remember that and thinking about it going, okay, that's our first true sign that probably some changes will be coming. But I think he's right. I think we've seen that at other places. Whether it's Nick Saban, had two new coordinators after year one at Alabama or whatever it is, we've seen other places do that. And I remember Tommy Tuberville early on, I think it was year 2, maybe year 3, but even then it was such a different world, but changed both coordinators. Those guys have been here with them a long time. And so I think you have to figure out, okay, what's our direction and what do we need? And I think we knew early on offensively that the direction was going to be that Hugh Freeze is going to be much more involved in the offense. And now will we see that in terms of the offense coordinator hire, how it goes with that. I mean, obviously Kent Austin is a guy on staff that they know each other very well. They've been together a long time. He's a quarterback guy. Would that be a possibility to be an offensive coordinator and then have Hugh Freeze still be the play caller and be the actual, maybe coordinator, but Kent Austin, the guy, will be very involved no matter what. Or do you go outside and potentially bring in somebody else, leave Kent Austin in that role as, kind of quality control analyst kind of role, bring in somebody else to be the actual coordinator, and obviously Hugh Freeze still be involved. That's what we have to see. We'll figure it out. There's some ways to go about it when your head coach is going to be that guy. It gives you a little bit of freedom. And I would guess that in this next few days, we'll start to see some things start to shake out a little bit. At least it feels that way.
Yeah, Derek Nix is a guy that we've mentioned as well from Ole Miss. It's a Hugh Freeze guy. I mean, they've been close for a long time. They were obviously Nix has been at Ole Miss forever, been there since 2008. He was on all 5 of Freeze's staffs at Ole Miss. Ken Austin, it feels like, is going to be in the mix regardless of what his role or what his actual title is. I mean, shoot, you guys talked to Walker White in San Antonio, and he was talking about, the decision to move on from Philip Montgomery, and he said, yeah, but I'm excited to get working with Coach Austin. And so that's somebody that has sort of been an expectation that if you're a quarterback at Auburn, you are going to be working with him in some way, shape, or form. Now, is he going to be an on-field assistant as a QB coach? We'll see. We'll figure that out. We think him and Derek Nix are a couple candidates, certainly to watch here. But like Jason said, it all depends on, we expect Hugh Freeze to have a bigger hand in the offense this season, have a bigger role in terms of the play calling and sort of taking things on himself. So how does he want to delegate from here moving forward? Because that was something he said in the Music City Bowl. He said, I don't think I did a very good job delegating. He's talked about how difficult it's been, to recruit and coach at the same time and get ready for offensive game plans. And I think a lot of that had to do with the Philip Montgomery situation not working out how he wanted. I think he thought he would just push that off, almost not entirely, but he would push off a large percentage of his offense to Montgomery, and he just sit back and try to get a top 10 class. Now they got a top 10 class, but they didn't do a bunch offensively. That'll lead us now, Jason, into talking a little bit about personnel. The transfer portal outgoing for Auburn has not been super surprising. It's been a while since Javarius Johnson entered the portal. That would probably be their biggest one so far in terms of a loss, until we reported a few days ago that Keontae Scott was making the decision to enter the portal. And then a few days later, he goes out on social media and says, hey, I'm coming back to Auburn. So the lowdown from what we can report is that he actually did enter the portal, did go through that process. But the thing is, you have 48 hours to do it if you're an institution. And within those 48 hours of it possibly being processed, the reason his name never popped up, because he withdrew before then. And so it's a situation where, look, like you said, like we talked about at the beginning, you're going to have this sort of thing now with guys, especially with the NIL world. Now, I'm not saying Keontae Scott was just chasing money, but you're in a position where, hey, there's changes going on around you. You got a new guy in Charles Kelly, crime dog Wes McGriff is going to Texas A&M. Obviously, he was in an off the field role for Auburn, but he was obviously a big player there as a coach in that secondary. There's changes going on around you. You want to know, what's happening. And I think Keontae Scott was in that situation, wondering if, because of a couple changes, obviously they're going to have a new defensive coordinator, wondering if Auburn was going to be the best move for him as a senior or in his final college season. Ultimately, he makes the decision to come back to Auburn, decides not to enter the transfer portal. And that is just a huge sigh of relief, Jason. I mean, that you would be down all your secondary starters. And now you've got a guy back there at that cornerback spot who's going to be the leader. He's going to be the leader of that secondary that's otherwise going to be a pretty inexperienced group next season.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's more uncertainty for a guy going into his last season than anything for Keontae Scott, because I think he's like, hey, I knew I was going to go out and kind of transform back into that outside corner that he did a little bit in the bowl game, and then all of a sudden you bring a new coach in, they may say, hey, I want to keep you where you were, and so I think it's just that some of that, hey, I need reassurance that everything is going to be good. And I think a lot of times you just have to, sit down and talk to the coaches. And I think that's what happened with guys like Keontae Scott. Tyler Scott was another guy that considered it as well, and just going, hey, we just want to make sure everything's okay. And I think once they got that reassurance, then I think they're fine. And that, you're right, is huge news. If nothing else, I mean, obviously Keontae's a really good football player, but from a perception standpoint, it's massive to not lose a guy like that. Because then people start to go, oh, red flags. I don't think in this day and age it shows red flags, but from a perception standpoint, it feels like it. But again, like I said, it's such a different world. Because you look and go, everything about Ole Miss is screamed, well, they're the team to watch, and then they lose their best football player. Does that mean red flags? No, it just means that's the way of the world right now. And so, but keeping Keontae was big for a secondary group that has a lot of young talent. When you look at this group, you bring in now Quan Robinson, junior college addition at safety, and then you have some pieces there with a Caleb Wooden at safety. Obviously, Donovan Kaufman now coming back, and J.D. Rim. You got some guys that have played football, then you got a lot of young talent, and you got some guys coming in. So spring's going to be really fun to watch for what I think is I think it's a more talented group in the secondary. You just lose so much experience and a lot of guys to replace when you add those guys in and then talk about Marcus Harris up front. That's a lot of snaps that you lose off that defense.
Yeah, and speaking of, they've been looking for defensive backs in the portal. They had Toledo corner RJ Delancey. They had him on a visit last week. He ends up committing to Wisconsin. It was a really big transfer week for them in terms of visitors. The window opened up and then it closed again. Basically, this window only existed here from last Wednesday to Sunday, only existed for transfer guys. Because you got to get them on campus, you got to get them set up, and then because, like you said, classes start Wednesday. Now, to our understanding, Auburn actually can add guys in the portal and still have them be good for spring practice up until the 17th. Not what is tomorrow? I guess not the 10th.
The 10th, yeah.
Because the 17th is the last day to drop classes. It's a week after school starts. So that was an interesting tidbit that we had heard last week. So don't be surprised if maybe they can continue to do so. Maybe they can continue to add transfers, even if there's Percy Lewis, the left tackle of Mississippi State. He's still on the clock for Auburn. If he goes and commits on Wednesday, he still could come to Auburn. But they got a couple more guys out of that visit week, Jason, so far. I mean, they could still get more. The first one was Rico Walker. He is an Auburn legacy, actually. Ricardo Walker was his father who played at Auburn, played on the defensive line. He was on that 1993 team. He's a second-year tight end from Maryland. Guy who was actually the number one recruit in Maryland's 2023 class. You and I were talking about it yesterday, Jason. This is, when you look at it, Ben Agamawa actually hasn't signed a tight end in either of his last two classes for some reasons or another. Now they didn't need a bunch of them. You got Rivaldo Fairweather, you have a bunch of veterans. This is more so, I don't know how much he's going to impact next year. He could, but you still have a bunch of tight ends back. This is essentially a retroactive signee for Ben Agamawa. This is a guy with a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism that you're just looking forward. And that was what he talked about after his visit. He said, hey, they showed me Rivaldo Fairweather's film. I know that there's going to be some seniors gone. He actually said, Jason, I don't really mind if I don't play that much this season, if it means that I will be well positioned moving forward. And that's who this kind of player could be for them. Yeah,
correct. I mean, the guy that has, I believe, still has his redshirt year. I think we went back and found out he played in 8 games last season. So you start talking about, what's next? Well, Rivaldo Fairweather, you would expect this to be, I think he would actually probably has 2 years left, but you would expect next year to be his last year. But Luke Deal, Brandon Frazier, you got 3 guys that will be moving on after this season. So you start going, okay, how do you get better? Obviously, Ryan Gee is a guy that's already committed in the 2025 class. You got Micah Riley, Ducker, this right there. You go, how do you bridge the gap a little bit? This is a guy that helps you do that. And he was actually a guy that was probably more known as a defensive player coming out of high school. He was a guy that was a pass rush edge kind of guy. And I think he feels like, hey, I feel like I'm better at tight end. And so he is kind of now has had 1 year to be just a true tight end. And now you get to year 2. Now it's a new offense. It'll be a new system. But I think he has the same qualities as Rivaldo. And watch him, really strong hands. He's physical. He's 245 pounds or so. So he's not small. He's not one of these wide receivers masquerading as a tight end. This guy has a bigger body. So I think it's a really good addition when you start talking about not having to have him step in and be a starter day one, and having a guy that understands that. I think it's a really good addition for Auburn to bolster that room, probably more for 25 and 26.
Yeah, and shortly after him, another visitor, Trill Carter, by the way, excellent defensive line name, from out of Texas. He played 3 years at Minnesota, and then now he transferred to Texas last season, obviously playing on one of the best defensive lines in the country. Kind of when you think of his production, think of a guy like Jason Jones and how much he played. Now, not production-wise, not player-wise, whatever, just how much he ended up playing at Texas. Just a guy who rotated in a lot. 6'2", 300 pounds. He's a guy who has a lot of Power 5 starts under his belt. He actually started 33 games at Minnesota, has played 46 college games in his career. This was a very business-like visit, Jason, for him. It was he didn't take any other visits last week. I think he really wanted to come to Auburn. I think Auburn really wanted him. And we're seeing this now from Jeremy Garrett. Look, Isaiah Rakes, the Texas A&M transfer, is still on the clock, possibly between Auburn and USC. Jeremy Garrett is looking at this thing saying, there's no Marcus Harris. I don't know if I have a surefire, bona fide difference maker in the middle like a Marcus Harris. So I'm just going to get 3 or 4 guys that could be, and maybe one of them will pop. Maybe all of them will be good enough to kind of do it together. They've already got Gage Keys from Kansas, so they get Trill Carter from Texas, sort of bigger interior player, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jeremy Garrett isn't done in the transfer portal.
Yeah, no, I think you can see a plan, and I think the plan right now is we're going to have a bunch of those guys, and we're going to play a bunch of them, and I think it's the right move. If you don't have Nick Fairley, or if you look at Texas had a bunch of those guys, and he still played a bunch, then play as many as you have, rotate them. Hey, some of these young guys are going to get in there and get into the mix right away. Malik Blockton, TJ Lindsey, those guys are going to play. We saw DJ Reed get a little action in a bowl game. Bobby Jameson Travis is, I thought, really good in his play in the bowl game, his first extended play that he got. So you start looking at those pieces. You get a Zykeivous Walker coming back. Justin Rogers, we're hearing, hey, maybe leaning towards coming back at the moment. Nothing done yet. Obviously, those things can change. But you look at the totality of the group and you go, there may not be one guy, but we got a bunch of guys we feel like can impact the game. And you start playing and rotating and staying fresh and having depth. And that's a step up from where you were last year. And so I think you lose probably the best player you have, but you may gain more players that can help you. And that's a better spot to be in. But you're right. Maybe you strike gold. Maybe it's one of the young guys. Maybe it's a Bobby Jameson Travis. But maybe it's Justin Rogers comes back and plays at 315 or 320 and all of a sudden becomes that guy that you thought he was. There's lots of options for this defensive line for sure.
Yeah, maybe Amaris Williams is just that dude right off the bat. I mean, it's tough to do from a defensive line spot, but he's certainly got the talent to do it. And we've heard people raving about. I wonder if a guy like TJ Lindsey might be the Connor Lew of the defensive line this season. Because I know he was Christian's, the superlative. He was the most underrated, he said, in this class, and that's something we've sort of heard even more now that he's on campus. So that's a really interesting group. And like you said, you can see a clear vision from Jeremy Garrett saying, I know I don't have a Marcus Harris. Like, I got a ton of young guys. I might have these returning guys. I'm going to get a couple more transfers. I'm going to play everybody and just kind of see who sticks.
And look at the emphasis. I mean, I said we remembered years, and it was mostly on offense, but there was years on the defensive line where it was pretty thin too. That is not going to be the case with this staff and under Jeremy Garrett. I mean, they already have 3 or 4 defensive linemen committed in next year's class. Big physical guys when you think about Malik Autry at Opelika, Jordan Crawford at Parker, then Antonio Coleman from Saraland. You have 3 legit interior defensive linemen committed already in 2025. And so you start thinking about those guys and thinking about what you signed this year with a guy that you mentioned, Amaris Williams. He checked in a little over 6'2", but he was around 260 pounds. But if you saw him from 50 yards away, you'd think he's a linebacker because he just has that physique and frame. He's going to play at 285, 290 and be an explosive athlete. You look right now, Malik Blockton's already about 285 pounds. TJ Lindsey's like 285. These are big guys, but they're big guys that can move and they're athletic. And that's the next step, is to get those types of players on the interior, on the defensive line. And so they've done a good job of trying to get to that level here in, just 13 months or so.
Yeah, so a few more transfers they'll be looking out for. Tomiwa Durojaye came over from West Virginia, took a visit. He is Florida State's top pass rusher on their board too. That was a guy like Auburn maybe hopes they struck gold with, because he ended up being a guy that a lot of power programs were looking at. Sort of a guy who would also play that defensive end role. We'll see. It's probably Auburn or Florida State for him. We mentioned Isaiah Rakes. That's him and Carter are just very similar players. I think Rakes is more of a nose tackle, but a guy who played at Texas A&M, played plenty on a excellent defensive line. He visited USC after Auburn, so probably between Auburn and USC. And then there was a wide receiver who was on campus, Jason, who's a really, really good player, CJ Daniels from Liberty. When he got there, it was a long line of hugs and greetings because he knows so many people on this staff. He went from Auburn. He then went to Florida. And then he went to Texas. So those were his 3 visits. We shall see. That also leads me a little bit, Jason. I just want to touch on this for a second about the quarterback question. Everybody's got it, and Caden Salter was a guy that everyone, pointed their finger at immediately once he was expected to enter the transfer portal. We have reported that Auburn did have significant interest in Salter. It was just kind of a crazy, sort of 48 hours after he entered the portal, he decided to come back to Liberty. And so now you're in a position where, look, you and I have talked about it. There is no question that we're just going to ride it out. We are not interested in going after a transfer quarterback. They're not doing that. They are interested in transfer quarterbacks. Now, that's not to say if they don't end up with one, they're not comfortable doing what the original plan is. They may, and they may be in a position where if they don't get one here, they saw what happened with a post-spring guy last year in Peyton Thorne. That's like, that's not enough time to get in the offense. You might think Thorne is more valuable than that. I think right now, Jason, they are keeping their eyes open and they are keeping their options open. I don't know if there's anybody particular. Salter may have been that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anyone in particular they are head over heels for at the moment. I think as it pertains to the quarterback spot, though, Auburn is keeping its options open as we get set for the players to return to class.
Yeah, I think it. And we talked about it from the get-go. Even when that was said, we kind of kept saying, "Look, but there's always, if the right guy shows up, you got to go try to improve yourself." And I think that was always on the back burner. I think that has changed to, hey, let's go see if we can find a guy instead of, well, if a guy falls in our lap. I think it's different now. You mentioned Caden Salter. It feels very much like the exact situation a year ago with Coastal Carolina. It feels very similar to a guy that said, hey, I'd like to go out here. And then when you do that, you realize maybe I'm not going to be able to do that for one reason or another. Maybe the transfer credits weren't enough, and you go, hey, let's just, I've got a good situation, I'm going to stay there. That happened last year. The guy that I now wonder about, because it's been so very quiet, and I thought it was going to be done right away, is Talia Tagovailoa. That's the one I thought was, man, that's a surefire. He's going to Miami where his brother is. Everybody can be together. Then Miami takes a transfer quarterback yesterday from Auburn, and you go, can they still take 2? Absolutely. Does it feel like that would happen? I don't know. Talia is a guy that would be really interesting if you were to do that. But I haven't heard anything about it. But these are things that are very different. The transfer world is not recruiting. You mentioned it is business. Like we saw it last year with Avery Jones. Avery Jones was on campus 3 hours after Auburn talked to him for the first time, signed before he left, and was Auburn starting center. It could happen that quick. Is there something going on? I have no idea. Would I be surprised? No, not really, because there's an opportunity for sure for somebody to come in. But, when you talk about quarterbacks, I believe that Auburn feels much, much better about the future of its quarterback position as we stand today than it did a month ago today. After seeing what Hank Brown did, then after watching Walker White and hearing the reports from him from San Antonio, I think they feel much better about the future of the quarterback position. And they already felt good, but I think it's reinforcement of, hey, we got some guys that can compete. But do you want to go out and try to find another guy to compete right now in 2024? I think you would like to have it. But again, I think it has to be the right guy. I don't think they're just going to go, well, we got to go find somebody. I don't think they're there. I think they want to go find somebody, and it has to be the right somebody.
Yeah, going back to what Freeze said about when they opened bowl practice, he said, well, you don't want to scare somebody like a Peyton Thorne and Holden Garner. You don't want to scare them off, or like a young guy. I mean, I don't think that would be the case for like a Walker White, but you don't want that obviously at all, because he's the future of your room. I think that mindset, I think, is just altered a little bit in the sense of, hey, we just want to make sure this room's better. We just want to make sure this room has improved, because even like we talked about, while you're doing the thought experiments with a guy like a Caden Salter, when that was the buzz, you're saying, and it's like, would he win the job? Probably, but who's to say Peyton Thorne wouldn't get better over the course of the offseason in the offense and go win the job. But you can at least say, you wanted us to make the room better, and we did. And so, I mean, it, like you said, it could happen like that. There was the Cam Ward thing that happened over the course of about 90 minutes, like that, that Auburn had interest, and then and then he just tweeted out that he was going to the NFL draft, like that kind of thing. And maybe there's some alternate reality where he just came to Auburn right then. Like there is that kind of thing can definitely happen. And I think Auburn's keeping their options open for things like that right now.
And here's the other part of it too. You can't worry about next year or the year after. Because I mentioned this on Monday when thinking about young guys, because we talked about like we talked about earlier with the roster of Tahad Pettiford and trying to plan for. You can't plan for a fifth-year guy going, hey, we're going to redshirt you, and then you're going to develop, and then you're going to be here, and and
you'll drive yourself crazy.
4 years to play. That doesn't happen anymore hardly. You'll have a couple of guys that'll still do it, and they'll be good, and they're fine. For the most part, right now, you better worry about today, and that's just the way it is. You can't worry about tomorrow. You better worry about today. And I think, for our perspective, I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to do those things while still keeping an eye on the future. Knowing that, look, you still have to continue to develop and build and think about those things, but you also have to go, you know what we got to do? We got to go try to find somebody to compete and we saw it last year at Ole Miss. They had a starting quarterback back, and they went out and grabbed 2 transfers and a freshman and said, okay, here you go win it again. Made him better.
And he did, and he was better. Yeah.
Competition made him better. So we'll see if there's somebody that in the next 8 days can get in before spring practice. Wouldn't be shocked. And I wouldn't be shocked if it happens and Auburn just goes, boom, hey, this guy signed, and okay, you're left scrambling, because I think it could be that quiet.
Yeah, and we'll see here how much more they do in the portal. You mentioned Percy Lewis. He's a guy that's between Auburn and Arkansas, visited Arkansas and then Auburn.
And he's going to visit Tennessee. He's visiting Tennessee now.
He is. Okay.
Yes, he's visiting Tennessee this weekend, I think. So now that one will carry over and see what happens. Not a great, when you think about it from our perspective, not great that there's still another visit in the works.
Yeah. Talking about positions that they're still looking at, offensive line is definitely one of them. They don't need to make a bunch of splashes here before the spring from a transfer perspective, because I think, quarterback maybe, but if you end up doing that, if it ends up being the right thing. But they're not in a position where it would be too bad if you backfill after the spring, you look like a veteran defensive back, and you feel like you need that guy, or another defensive lineman after the spring that's played a lot of football, and you just get him in here. They're not, and again, we're beating a dead horse with the offensive line thing, but they're not scrambling. They would like these guys, and they would be the first to say they have missed on a couple of these guys. And Free said it has been frustrating. And if they don't get Percy Lewis, like Jake Thornton loves Percy Lewis, thinks he could be a starting tackle next year, that would be really frustrating. Same time, you got plenty of guys. Dylan Wade confirmed yesterday he's coming back. Another example of a guy who's it should be coming back, but now that with the world it is, and in college football, you have to say it. You have to go out and say that you're going to be back. But they handled this last year. They made sure the offensive line was
the scrambling happened this time a year ago.
Correct.
Yeah, they've already done the scramble drill on the offensive line. And so, if you could add a guy like that, Nathan, no question, it makes you a better football team. Can Tyler Johnson develop? Can Too Tall take the next step? You think about, you got some potential, the guys at offensive tackle, but you don't have 5 or 6 of those guys. That's what you'd like. That's, in a perfect world, you'd like to have, hey, we got 5 or 6 of those guys that we feel good about at tackle. And if they don't, then you can slide one inside the guard, and you got 5 or 6 more there, and then you have 4 centers and a guard that can slide. Can you get that number to 14, 15? Right now Auburn feels good about probably 10, which is about 7 more than they felt good about when they got here last year. And so you've done a good job of getting there, but there's still a long way to go, because that's part of life on the offensive line and how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, they may end up getting a transfer, and then they have all returning guys start. You could be in that position. Wilfred from the JUCO level, like they think he could be a guy who could contend at tackle. We got a little bit of validation too on our Tyler Johnson hype from Percy Lewis. He didn't name him, by name, but he said, yeah, they've got a freshman tackle they feel really good about, but they want to bridge the gap. And so we're like, Thank you very much.
Mhm.
That's Mr. Tyler Johnson right there. Could be a guy for the future. Jason, I think we've about covered all our bases here. It's been a crazy last couple weeks. I think maybe some more staff clarity. It'll calm down. But I'm not necessarily saying I want it to calm down. I mean, y'all have junior day this weekend. Basketball, as we record this right now, I didn't want to get too into it because I think by the time most people listen, they'll probably play Texas A&M. But as of right now, they're 1-0 in the SEC. Just beat the tar out of Arkansas, and they've got another nemesis tonight. That would be, you'd get off the schneid 2 times in a row to open up SEC play because it's crazy, Jason. 5 of the last 6 they've lost to A&M. That's crazy for any SEC team in the Bruce Pearl era. And they've won 3 on Auburn's home floor over the past 5 years. So this is not an easy out by any means. But we appreciate everybody tuning in. AuburnUndercover.com, as I understand it, still 60% off. We threw that thing back up when there was like 12 pieces of news in one day. We were like, yeah, might as well. why don't y'all jump on here? So if you guys aren't a subscriber to the site, it's been crazy, but it's been really, really fun. And we haven't even mentioned, Jason, maybe we'll get on a podcast soon and talk about y'all's impressions of this class as they get enrolled. Because you and Christian were out in San Antonio covering the All-American game and getting to know Auburn signees a little bit better before they come on campus. And so it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. AuburnUndercover.com. We would appreciate if you guys go check us out. And if you want to join us, like I said, 60% off for the entire year. It's a great deal. If you guys enjoyed the show today, please leave us a 5-star review. That is the number one thing that helps us. The bumper music is by Beats by Mordecai. Follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. For Jason Caldwell, I am Nathan King. We'll catch you guys later. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon.